Okay, so the next section that we're going to look at is the reliability of memory. And you've already looked at basic memory models, the encoding, storage, and retrieval of memory. And now we're going to look at how valid is memory? How reliable are those memories that we have encoded? And for memory, reliability is really about how consistent information is over time. So are our memories consistent, or are they accurate? Do they stay the same the longer that we have them? And one of the questions that many psychologists ask is, does the type of memory influence whether or not it's reliable? So do more emotional memories mean that we are remembering them more accurately, or do all memories get recalled the same way? So how reliable are the memories? Do they stay the same over time, or do they change? So we're going to test it out a little bit, and you're going to need to do these things, write them down, and then pause the video and maybe talk to some other people. You can also do this later. It doesn't have to be right when you're in the middle of taking notes, but it's a fun little way to test out your reliability of memory. So first of all, I want you to write down a description of the following times in your life. So the first thing is the first day of school this school year. Write down everything you can remember, be as specific as possible. The second thing would be a description of your favorite teacher's classroom from elementary school. I mean, I know you all want to write down what my classroom is like because I know I'm your favorite, but try and think of a teacher from elementary school and write down everything you can remember about their classroom. The next thing is a description of a field trip that you went on in the last 12 months. And if it's not necessarily a field trip, maybe think of something that you did in the last 12 months with another person. So I don't want you to think of something that you did by yourself, but with another person. So you're going to write down as much as you can about each of these 3 different events. And then once you're done writing it down, I want you to go ask people who experienced those events as well and see how accurate you were. Okay, let's get into the notes. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the idea of repressed memories. You've probably heard about this in the news, in the media, because repressed memories were very controversial just a few years ago because some researchers believe, like Freud, believe that people repress memories to protect their own conscious self from knowing things that they cannot cope with. So basically, it's sending those dangerous memories, those dangerous things to the unconscious so that you won't even know that they're there. Basically, it's like a defense mechanism for your brain to keep your brain from having to go through or remember those things that were unpleasant. And if you're repressing them, the person will deny that they ever happened. Freud and other researchers believe that those memories will continue to haunt the person, but they'll be in a symbolic way. So maybe in a dream or through anxiety or through physical symptoms. And then psychologists can retrieve that memory only using very specific techniques. So psychoanalysis. And so this is one of the things that came out into, like, I guess, average people about, I would say about a decade ago. And there was this huge push for people going to a hypnotherapist to try and bring out some repressed memories. And the place that we saw this very frequently was in child sexual abuse cases. They were now remembering abuse that happened during their childhood. And people were starting to accuse their family members of this abuse. So there was a lot of research that was happening, and Elizabeth Loftus is one of those researchers that wanted to see whether or not this was true, whether these people were actually remembering true memories, or if these were false memories that people believed to be true. Basically, the idea that were these memories planted into the patient's mind, and then they're now believing that they are true. We're going to look at a research study done by Elizabeth Loftus, who you see in this picture. That is a pretty famous study, and we refer to it as the Lost in the Mall study. And her aim was to determine if false memories of autobiographical events can be created through the power of suggestion. Really, she was trying to combat this idea of repressed memories being brought to light through hypnotherapy. And so what she did is she took a group of participants, 3 males and 21 females. Before the study even started, Elizabeth Loftus contacted a parent or a sibling of the participant and asked them 2 questions. And those questions were, could you tell me 3 childhood memories of the participant? And do you remember a time when the participant was lost in a mall? The participants only then carried on with the rest of the study if their family member said that they had never been lost in the mall. After this interview with a parent or a sibling was done, participants were then sent a questionnaire in the mail. And on that questionnaire, participants were asked to describe 4 different memories. There were 3 events that were real from their life, and then there was one that was getting lost in the mall. And participants were asked to write as much detail as they could about each of the events. And if they didn't remember that happening to them, they were supposed to write, I do not remember this. After they filled out the questionnaire, participants were interviewed twice over the course of 4 weeks. And during this interview, they were asked again to recall as much information as they could about each of those 4 events. In addition to saying what they believe happened, participants were also asked to rate how confident they were in those memories. So basically saying, do you think that that memory is actually correct? Do you think you have all of the details correct? After they were done doing the questionnaire and then the 2 interviews, participants were debriefed and they were told that one of the memories was false, and participants were asked if they could guess which of the memories was false. Surprisingly, 25% of the participants recalled, and I put that in quotes because it's really not true. They had actually said, yes, I was lost in the mall. Most of the participants ranked that false memory, so the lost in the mall memory, as less confident, and that they wrote less about it, meaning that they didn't fully believe that it was true and they didn't have a ton of details about it. Because 25% of people actually did say something about this memory, this tells us that memories can be implanted. Loftus showed us that she could have participants remember a memory that never actually happened. This gives us strong evidence for the power of suggestion in creating false memories. On the other hand, only 25% of the participants recalled that false memory. It doesn't really tell us why most of the participants didn't remember that, why we could only implant it into a quarter of the participants and not all of them. So that doesn't give us really enough to say for sure that a memory can be implanted. The next thing we're going to talk about when we talk about the reliability of memories is the idea of reconstructive memory. And this is the idea of, can we alter a memory? So can a memory that we encode on our own that is actually true be changed throughout time? And we really are looking at 2 different things. Number 1, the idea of reconstructive memory, and number 2, the idea of the misinformation effect. So again, this is Elizabeth Loftus. She is a current psychologist. She is well known in the psychology community. And she claims that the nature of questions that we ask people about a memory could potentially influence the way that you remember it. She says that this is incredibly important when it comes to eyewitness accounts or eyewitness testimony in crimes. Because if a police officer or a lawyer asks a leading question, that could potentially influence the witness to fill in some of the gaps unknowingly with information that might not be correct. It could be information that is built using past experiences or stereotypes, or even information that people have gained after the event occurred. This idea of leading questions and post-event information facilitating the processing of schema that we have is called the misinformation effect. Loftus really believes that when we are asking questions to people, the phrases that we use or the words that we use can change or alter how we view that memory that we encoded or at an earlier time. So to study the misinformation effect, Loftus and her partner Palmer developed a study called the car crash study in 1974 to really study the misinformation effect. The aim was to investigate whether the use of leading questions could affect the eyewitnesses' estimation of speed. And the connection here is to really see if a leading question or changing a question slightly could potentially change the person's memory of an event that they saw. To carry out this study, Loftus and Palmer gathered 45 students and divided them into 5 groups of 9. Each of these groups participated in only one of the conditions, and therefore this is an independent samples design. During the study, 7 short films or traffic accidents were shown. Each of these films was taken from a driver's ed class, and they all involved some sort of traffic accident. Then participants were asked to give an account or a recollection of what happened during the accident, and they answered a questionnaire about each of the accidents that happened. On each questionnaire, there was also one critical question, and the question was, how fast were the cars going when they blanked each other? And that blank was filled in with one of 5 verbs: hit, collided, bumped, smashed, and contacted. Loftus and Palmer wanted to see if changing that verb in the study changed the estimation of speed. So changed how fast people thought each of the cars were going during the accident. What Loftus and Palmer found is that the more intense verbs, like smashed, actually led to a higher average estimate of speed. And you can see the averages below in this table. So smashed had a 40.8 mile per hour estimate, and then contacted had a 31.8 mile per hour estimate. So there's a huge difference in the means of that speed estimate. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that because there were different verbs used during the critical question, each of those verbs activated a different schema for that word, meaning that we have a specific definition in our mind of what those words mean. So to us, the word smashed means something different than collided. And when we are thinking about those words, we're going to estimate the speed differently according to what our understanding of that word means. So when the question is asked using smashed, the connotation of the verb influences our estimation of the speed, telling us that we expect it to be going faster than the verb collided. This gives us evidence for the misinformation effect because the post-event information, the question that was asked, did actually lead to a change in the recall of the event. So some strengths and limitations of this study. First of all, this was a very controlled study, so we do get very clear cause and effect that the verb is the reason for the change in the speed estimate. However, it was done in a lab, and so we have low ecological validity, and we really are losing some of the naturalistic aspects of this study. There's really no emotions involved in this type of car crash because you're not actually experiencing an accident. You're just watching a film that was created for a driver's ed video. The closed questions of the study, like yes or no questions, can lead to some problems because sometimes people want to elaborate more than just yes or no. Lastly, all of the participants in the study were students. And so this is definitely a biased sample, and we have to question whether or not people have the ability to estimate speed. Are there other factors that come into play when people are estimating speed of a car? So let's look at the counter argument of this. And that counter argument is the idea that memory is reliable. We do remember things we are emotionally tied to. And Yuille and Cutshall in 1986 really wanted to develop some sort of study as a response to Loftus and Palmer. And what they did is they took a real crime scene, and the crime was an armed robbery and shooting, and they interviewed 21 eyewitnesses from the crime 4 months after. 13 witnesses agreed to be part of the study, and they gave an account of what happened and were asked 2 very specific leading questions. Yuille and Cutshall found that these eyewitnesses actually recalled a lot of very accurate detail, and most of them didn't really make any errors because of those leading questions. Yuille and Cutshall also found that those who were most distressed about the incident actually recalled the event with much more detail and much more accuracy. While this study does have stronger ecological validity than Loftus and Palmer, it's a little bit different because we have a strong emotional response, and so we are adding in another independent variable. This is a strong piece of evidence that memory is reliable, however, because we have archival evidence from the police reports to confirm the accuracy of these testimonies. So we can truly see that people were remembering things correctly. Because Loftus's study was done in a lab, there is a lot more reliability when it comes to Loftus's study because we're able to replicate it again and again. Yuille Cutshall, we can't really replicate because we really don't have any control of when these crimes are going to happen. And so we just kind of have to go with whenever it does happen. The question also becomes, were the people who were in Yuille Cutshall's study talking about the robbery and the shooting more than the people who were in Loftus and Palmer's? Did this lead to them remembering the incident much more clearly and with much more detail? Were they reading about it in the news? Were they being asked about it by different family members? All of these things are confounding variables that Loftus and Palmer were able to control for in their study. However, this does give us some evidence that we can't really say for certain that all memories are going to be distorted by leading questions. The next thing that comes up after we look at Yuille Cutshall's study is the idea of flashbulb memories. When Yuille Cutshall did their study, it really brought up a question that why were people who were more distressed about the event remembering things more accurately and in more detail? And so many different researchers want to study this idea of what we call a flashbulb memory. And psychologists call flashbulb memories any memory that is highly detailed, exceptionally vivid, and it's usually relating to a surprising or emotionally arousing event that happened. Most of the time, these are believed to have different characteristics than ordinary memory, and most psychologists believe that these memories are resistant to forgetting. One of the examples that most psychologists use when talking about flashbulb memories are events that are emotionally triggering to a large group of people, such as September 11th or other traumatic events. The first piece of research that we're going to look at regarding flashbulb memories is Brown and Kulik, and this is actually the first study that kind of defined this idea of what a flashbulb memory is. So this study was a questionnaire given to 80 different participants. The participants were given a series of 9 events, and each of those events was a significant historical event, like the assassination of JFK, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X. In each of these scenarios, participants were asked if they recalled the circumstances in which you first heard about the events. If they can say yes, then they were asked to write their account and rate on a scale of 1 to 5 the importance of this event to that person. What Brown and Kulik found is that people had very clear memories of where they were, what they were doing, and what they were feeling when they learned about these important public events. However, they also found a very clear link between the personal importance of the event and how clearly the person remembered it. For example, white participants had a much lower rate of flashbulb memories relating to the assassination of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. compared to Black participants. Some things that were brought up after this study was done was that this study really has no way of determining how accurate those memories were for the people. All we're doing is having them write a story of what they think happened. How do we know if that's actually what they were doing or actually what they were feeling during the event? We have no ability to test the individual level of surprise upon hearing the event, and we have no way to measure how emotionally affected participants were when that event happened. In addition, there's a really high probability that demand characteristics impacted these results. For example, these events are of national importance. So people are going to be talking about them, they're going to be on the news, and they're going to be talked about throughout people's lives over and over again. So multiple studies have been done to follow up with Brown and Kulik to kind of see whether or not flashbulb memories are actually significant and whether or not we remember something more specifically when they're emotionally triggering to us. And the next study we're going to look at is a counter-argument to this idea that flashbulb memory is more reliable. And the counter-argument is that it's not. Flashbulb memories are just as reliable as regular memories. Hint, hint, not reliable at all. And this study was done by Neisser and Harsch in 1992. Neisser and Harsch argued that flashbulb memories are prone to significant distortion, especially when there's a long period of time between when you originally heard about the event and when you're recalling it. So the aim of this study was to determine whether flashbulb memories were more susceptible to distortion than other memories. Participants were 106 university students in an intro to psychology course, less than 24 hours after the Challenger disaster, which you could see in that photo in the last slide. Students were given a questionnaire that had a number of different questions, and the questions included a description of how they heard the news, what time was it when you heard the news, how did you hear, what were you doing, where were you, who told you, who else was with you, etc., etc. All of these questions were answered by participants, and then 2.5 years later, Neisser and Harsch asked those participants to fill out the questionnaire again. 44 of the 106 original participants did complete the questionnaire a second time, 30 women and 14 men. In addition to answering the same questions again, participants were asked the second time to rate their confidence level for each question on a scale of 1 to 5, with a 1 being, I don't remember anything, to a 5 being, I'm 100% confident that this is what happened. At the end of the questionnaire, participants were asked if they had ever filled out a questionnaire on the subject before, and only 11 participants, 25% of the 44, said yes, that they had filled out a questionnaire like this before. After the questionnaire, participants were brought in for a semi-structured interview to try and gather more information about what the participants had written on that second questionnaire. At the end of the interview, participants were shown their original 1986 report in their own handwriting. What Neisser and Harsch found is that there were huge discrepancies between the original 1986 questionnaire and the 1988 questionnaire. Here's an example. 24 hours after the accident, I was in my religion class and some people walked in and started talking about it. I didn't know any details except that it had exploded and the school teacher students had all been watching, which I thought was so sad. Then after the class, I went to my room and watched the TV program talking about it, and I got all the details from that. 2.5 years later, the same participant said, when I first heard about the explosion, I was sitting in my freshman dorm room with my roommate, and we were watching TV. It came on a news flash, and we were both totally shocked. I was really upset, and I went upstairs to talk to a friend of mine, and then I called my parents. In order to look at the discrepancies between these two questionnaires, Neisser and Harsch had to come up with some sort of score to quantify whether or not participants were correct in the content of their questions. So they looked at 7 different content questions and gave a point for each of the matched responses to the original response. The mean score was 2.95 out of 7 possible points. 11 participants scored a 0, meaning none of their answers matched. 22 participants of the 44 scored 2 or less, and only 2 participants scored the maximum of 7 points, which means that they matched all 7 of their answers. In spite of the lack of accuracy, so in spite of them not matching any of their answers, most participants demonstrated a very high level of confidence in their answers. Their mean confidence rating was a 4.17 out of 5, meaning that they really felt that they were answering correctly in their second response. And when the participants were presented with their original questionnaire, most of them were surprised and could not account for why there were such huge discrepancies between the original and the second questionnaire. So while this study does give us a lot of evidence for the fact that memories can be changed and altered over time, including those flashbulb memories, this is a case study. It was done over a long period of time and it's perspective, which means that we looked at an event immediately after it happened and then continued to follow the same people. It was also using method triangulation by using both questionnaires and interviews. However, it's really difficult to replicate this type of study because we don't have events that are of this national importance very often. Only 44 of the 106 original participants decided to participate the second time. This is a huge number of participants who did not continue. This does, however, have a very high amount of ecological validity because we are simply asking people to remember what happened in their daily life. But because it's naturalistic, we have a ton of confounding variables, and this can lead to some problems with the study and the reliability of it. Many studies have been done following this with different significant events like September 11th that have had very similar results. The idea that these flashbulb memories that people seem to have can be altered over time. That is what we call the transferability of findings. Even though it's not the exact same replicated study, we do have similar results when we're doing a similar study. Okay, so now we're at the end of this video. We have a lot of research about whether or not memory is reliable. It's not. And I want you to go check with the people that you originally were talking about with those memories to see how accurate your memories were.